The envelope hit the kitchen table like a gunshot, its edges crisp and accusing under the harsh fluorescent light of the Queen's Diner where Elijah had worked double shifts for 3 years. "Open it," his father rasped, voice gravelly from decades of Marlboros and unspoken regrets, his calloused mechanic's hands trembling as he shoved it forward. Elijah's hands, pale and ink-stained from late-night sketches, froze midair. In that split second, before the paper tore and the truth spilled out like black ink on a white canvas, Elijah felt the world tilt, the greasy scent of fries and regret thickening the air, binding them in a silence that screamed louder than any coming-out fight they'd survived. Elijah Ramirez had always known his family was a patchwork quilt of secrets stitched with good intentions and bad luck. Born in the shadow of the Verrazano Bridge to a Mexican-American mother who died in childbirth and a father who'd raised him alone in a cramped Astoria apartment, Elijah grew up dodging the whispers of neighbors who eyed the single dad with the perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and the Nam flashbacks that turned quiet dinners into minefields. Jack Ramirez wasn't the hugging type. His love came in oil-stained work boots fixed for free and baseball gloves worn soft from endless catch sessions in the park. But Elijah, with his sharp cheekbones inherited from a ghost mother and eyes the color of storm-tossed Hudson waves, had always felt like the odd thread, too sensitive for the rough-and-tumble world Jack tried to armor him against. By 25, Elijah had carved out his own corner in the chaos of New York City, slinging eggs at the diner by day and chasing dreams of graphic design by night, his laptop a lifeline to a world beyond grease traps and graveyard shifts. He was out, had been since 16, when Jack found the crumpled printout of a Grindr chat in his backpack and responded not with fists but with a six-pack and a gruff, "World's full of assholes. Kid. Just don't let 'em break you." It wasn't Hallmark, but it was enough. Or so Elijah thought, until the Ancestry kit arrived 6 months ago. A whim gift from his best friend Mia after a tequila-fueled rant about knowing your roots. Poppy. Jack had laughed it off, but Elijah spit in the tube anyway, mailing it off with a half-hearted curiosity about distant cousins in Guadalajara. Now, here they were. The results barcode scanned and damning. 0% paternal match. Jack's weathered face crumpled like wet cardboard as Elijah read aloud, his voice cracking on the clinical jargon, genetic markers inconsistent, the words hanging heavy between the Formica counter and the ticking clock. "What the fuck does this mean, Dad?" Elijah whispered, the envelope fluttering to the floor like a dying bird. Jack didn't answer at first, just stared at his coffee mug, the steam curling up like ghosts from his unspoken sins. When he finally spoke, it was a whisper that shattered everything. "It means I ain't the man who knocked her up, son. But I was the one who stayed." The diner blurred around them as Elijah stumbled out into the November chill, the city lights smearing into neon halos through unshed tears. Astoria's streets, alive with halal carts and laughter spilling from Irish pubs, felt alien now, a stage set for someone else's tragedy. He walked for blocks, the DNA results burning a hole in his pocket, until his phone buzzed. Mia, checking in. But it wasn't her name on the screen. It was Brandon. Brandon Hayes. The name alone sent a jolt through Elijah's veins, a mix of fire and ache that had no business flaring up on a night like this. They'd met 3 months back at a queer art crawl in Bushwick, Elijah nursing a cheap IPA amid graffiti murals that mirrored the chaos in his sketchbook, Brandon leaning against a wall with that effortless cool, tall, broad-shouldered, with honey blonde hair falling just so over hazel eyes that promised mischief and mornings after. A graphic novelist from the Midwest, Brandon had that Midwestern earnestness wrapped in New York edge, faded Levi's, a vintage Ramones tee, and a laugh that cut through the din like sunlight through rain clouds. "Your lines have soul," he'd said, nodding at Elijah's portfolio, and just like that, the night unraveled into stolen kisses in alleyways and tangled sheets in Brandon's Williamsburg loft. It wasn't love, not yet. Or so Elijah told himself, ignoring the way Brandon's fingers traced lazy circles on his back at dawn, or how their silences felt like shared secrets rather than awkward pauses. Brandon was a transplant too, fresh off a divorce from a college sweetheart who'd bailed when he came out, leaving him with a battered Subaru and a manuscript about lost boys in cornfields. "We're both running from something," Brandon had murmured one night, their bodies slick and spent, Elijah's head pillowed on his chest. "Maybe that's why it fits." Now, staring at the text, "Missed you today. Doors open if you need a soft landing." Elijah's thumb hovered, the weight of the revelation pressing down like the subway rumble beneath his feet. He typed back before he could think. "On my way. Bring whiskey." The walk to the L train felt endless, each step a negotiation with the fracture in his chest. By the time he buzzed up to Brandon's fourth-floor walk-up, the first tears had fallen, hot and unbidden, wiped away on the sleeve of his hoodie. Brandon opened the door barefoot, concern etching lines around his eyes that made him look older than 28. "Jesus, babe, what happened?" He pulled Elijah inside without waiting for an answer, the loft enveloping them in its familiar clutter. Half-finished panels pinned to corkboards, takeout containers from last week's Thai binge, the faint scent of turpentine and sandalwood incense. Elijah collapsed onto the worn leather couch, the DNA printout clutched like a talisman, and let it all pour out, the test, the words, Jack's haunted gaze. Brandon listened, whiskey poured neat in mismatched tumblers, his hand a steady anchor on Elijah's knee. "That's heavy," Brandon said finally, voice low and steady, the kind of calm that came from patching his own wounds. He pulled Elijah close, lips brushing his temple. "But it doesn't change shit about who raised you. Jack's your dad. Biology be damned." Elijah wanted to believe it, leaned into the warmth of Brandon's embrace, the solid reality of him chasing away the ghosts for a moment. Their kiss started soft, a balm against the raw edges, but hunger took over, hands fumbling with zippers, breaths mingling in desperate gasps. Brandon's body was a map Elijah knew by heart, the freckles dusting his collarbone, the scar from a childhood bike crash snaking across his ribs. They moved to the bed, shedding clothes like old skins, Elijah losing himself in the rhythm of skin on skin, the way Brandon whispered his name like a prayer. Afterward, tangled in sheets that smelled of them, Elijah traced the tattoo on Brandon's forearm, a compass rose, inked in faded black. "What if I'm not who I thought?" he murmured, the question slipping out unbidden. Brandon propped on an elbow, eyes searching his. "Then we figure it out together. You're not alone in this." Eli, the nickname, soft and intimate, wrapped around Elijah's heart like vines. For the first time that night, sleep came easy, Brandon's heartbeat a lullaby against his ear. But dawn brought no mercy. Elijah woke to the sound of his phone shattering the quiet. "Jack," voice thick with apology and bourbon. "Come home, kid. We gotta talk about your mother." And something else. The something else lingered like smoke, curling into Elijah's doubts. He glanced at Brandon, still asleep, golden in the slanted light, and felt a pang of something fierce and fragile. Whatever came next, he'd face it. But as he dressed quietly, slipping out with a note on the pillow, "Back soon. Love the mess we make." He couldn't shake the feeling that the inheritance waiting wasn't just blood, but a legacy of hidden loves and buried truths that would test everything he held dear. The subway ride back to Astoria was a blur of graffiti-scarred tunnels and half-heard podcasts about resilience, Elijah's mind replaying Jack's words like a scratched record. By the time he pushed open the apartment door, the place felt smaller, the walls closing in with the weight of 40 years' secrets. Jack was at the kitchen table, a pot of coffee brewing like an olive branch, his eyes red-rimmed but resolute. "Sit," he said. No preamble, sliding over a faded photo album Elijah hadn't seen since childhood. The pages crackled under his fingers, yellowed snapshots of a younger Jack, vibrant, almost smiling, arms slung around a woman with Elijah's eyes, her dark hair wild in the wind off Coney Island. His mother, Rosa. But it was the next photo that stopped his breath. Jack and a man, mid-laugh on a sun-drenched porch somewhere rural, hands brushing in a way that spoke volumes. "Who?" Elijah trailed off, heart hammering. "His name was Tommy," Jack said, voice steady for the first time. "We met in Nam. Saved each other's asses more times than I can count. When we got back, well, things were different then. Your mom knew. She loved us both, in her way. When she got pregnant by Tommy, turns out, she made me promise to raise you right. Said it was the only way to keep you safe." The words landed like punches, each one reshaping the foundation Elijah had stood on. Tommy, his biological father, gone too soon to AIDS in the 80s, a ghost Jack had carried alone. "Why hide it?" Elijah demanded, anger flaring hot. "All these years, pretending, because love like that, it wasn't safe," Jack cut in, ice fierce. "Not for Tommy, not for me. I chose you over everything. But you're right to be pissed. And now, there's more." He slid over a letter, envelope brittle with age, addressed in looping script, "For my son, when he's ready." Tommy's words, waiting all this time. Elijah's hands shook as he broke the seal. The ink faded but the emotion raw. Tales of stolen weekends in the Catskills. Dreams of a life unapologetic. And a plea, be brave where I couldn't. Love without chains. Tucked inside was a key, small and brass, no label. "To a cabin upstate," Jack explained. "His family's place. They knew about us, left it to you in his will. Figured it was time you claimed what's yours." The drive north that afternoon was tense. Jack's old Ford rattling along I-87, autumn leaves blazing like accusations along the roadside. Elijah clutched the key like a lifeline, the letter's words echoing, "Love without chains." By the time they pulled up to the weathered A-frame nestled in the Shangum foothills, dusk was falling, the air crisp with pine and possibility. The cabin was frozen in time, dusty quilts, shelves of dog-eared queer lit from the 70s, a sketchbook filled with Tommy's tender lines, portraits of Jack, young and unguarded. That night, as Jack snored on the pull-out couch, Elijah sat by the wood stove, flames dancing shadows across the walls. The inheritance wasn't just wood and memories. It was permission, a queer lineage of quiet defiance. He texted Brandon, "Found out more. It's a lot. Cabin in the mountains. Come if you can." The reply buzzed back instant, "On my way. Hold the fort." Brandon arrived at dawn, his Subaru kicking up gravel like a promise. Headlights cutting through the mist rolling off the lake like a scene from one of his own graphic pages. Elijah met him on the porch, wrapped in a wool blanket against the bite, the key still warm in his palm from a night of turning it over like worry beads. "You drove all night?" Elijah asked, voice rough from unshed emotion, pulling Brandon into a hug that bordered on desperate. "Couldn't sleep thinking about you up here alone with all this," Brandon murmured, his chin resting on Elijah's shoulder, breath warm against his neck. The embrace lingered, bodies aligning in that instinctive way, until Jack cleared his throat from the doorway, coffee mug in hand, his gruff nod the closest he'd come to approval. "Hayes, right? Make yourself useful, firewood's low." The day unfolded in a rhythm of small salvations, chopping logs with axes that bit satisfyingly into oak, the three of them falling into an uneasy truce around the breakfast table laden with canned beans and fresh trout Jack caught from the stream. Stories seeped out like sap, Jack's, halting at first, about foxholes and forbidden touches. Tommy's, pieced from letters Elijah read aloud by firelight, painting a man who'd loved fiercely in a world that demanded silence. Brandon listened with that quiet intensity, sketching idly on scrap paper, his lines capturing the cabin's eaves and the way light fractured through iced panes. By evening, with Jack retired early to nurse a headache born of old wounds, the cabin felt charged, the air thick with unspoken invitations. Elijah and Brandon escaped to the loft, a cramped space under slanted beams where moonlight slanted in like a spotlight. "Show me what you drew," Elijah said, settling cross-legged on the air mattress, the blanket tenting around them like a private world. Brandon hesitated, then handed over the pad, rough thumbnails of Elijah by the stove, eyes distant and luminous, Jack's profile etched with quiet sorrow. "It's you," Brandon said simply, seeing the bones of things. Like Tommy did, their eyes met, and the space between them hummed. Elijah leaned in, capturing Brandon's mouth in a kiss that tasted of pine smoke and urgency, hands roaming familiar paths with renewed hunger. Clothes whispered to the floorboards, bodies arching in the dim glow, Elijah gasping as Brandon's lips trailed fire down his spine. It was more than release, it was reclamation, each touch a defiance against the fractures threatening to pull Elijah apart. They lay afterward in a tangle of limbs, breaths sinking like a shared pulse. "This place. It's like a time capsule," Brandon whispered, fingers combing through Elijah's hair. "Your dad's carrying so much guilt. But you're the bridge, Eli. Between what was and what could be." Elijah turned, propping on his elbow to study Brandon's face, the faint stubble shadowing his jaw, the vulnerability in his gaze that mirrored his own. For the first time, the word love flickered unbidden, not scary but inevitable, like the first snow dusting the windows. The next morning brought a fragile peace, the three men snowed in by an early squall that blanketed the hills in white silence. Jack taught Brandon to tie flies for fishing, gruff instructions laced with rare humor, while Elijah explored the cabin's attic, unearthing a trunk of Tommy's relics, faded Polaroids of Pride marches in San Francisco, a leather journal scrawled with poems that bled raw emotion, odes to stolen glances, to the ache of half-lives. One entry gutted him. "Jack thinks he's straight enough to marry Rosa, to give our boy a name. But love like ours doesn't fade. It ferments, turns to something stronger. If I go first, tell him to let it out. For me, for the kid." Elijah carried the journal downstairs, sharing passages over mugs of spiked cider, the words weaving them tighter. Jack's eyes glistened, the first crack in his armor, and when he pulled Elijah into a rough hug, felt like absolution. You got his fire, kid. And my stubborn. Use it well. Brandon watched from the sidelines, his presence a steady hum, but Elijah caught the shadow in his eyes, a flicker of something withheld, like a panel left half-sketched. That night, as the storm howled, they played cards by lantern light, stories flowing freer. Brandon's Iowa upbringing, the church youth group where he'd first tasted forbidden fruit behind the bleachers. Jack's post-war drift, bartending in Hell's Kitchen where drag queens became unlikely confidants. Laughter came, tentative at first, then full-throated, chasing shadows from the corners. But as the fire died to embers, Brandon's phone lit up, a text he silenced quickly, face tightening. Work? Elijah asked lightly, but the evasion in Brandon's nod planted a seed of doubt. The thaw came midweek, roads clearing enough for Jack to insist on heading back, citing the diner's owner who'd cover but not forgive endless absences. You stay. Sort your head, he told Elijah, clapping Brandon on the shoulder with a look that said don't fuck this up. The drive away was a speck in the rear view of Elijah's borrowed resolve, leaving him and Brandon alone in the cabin's hush, the world reduced to creaking beams and the lake's endless lap. They filled the days with exploration, hikes along frost-rimed trails where Elijah sketched the ridge lines, Brandon narrating half-formed plot twists inspired by the land. Evenings dissolved into intimacy, slow and exploratory, bodies mapping new territories in the king-sized bed Tommy had carved himself from local walnut. I could stay here forever, Elijah breathed one night, Brandon's weight a welcome anchor above him, their rhythms sinking in a dance of gasps and whispers. With you, but forever cracked on the fourth day, when Elijah found the sketchpad Brandon had left on the kitchen counter. Not the tender portraits, but pages of a different story. Panels of a young man unraveling family secrets, a cabin in the woods, figures blurred but unmistakable. It was their story, raw and rendered, but the margins held notes in a stranger's scrawl edits, suggestions, dated weeks before the DNA test. Heart-pounding, Elijah confronted him by the lake, wind whipping words like knives. This isn't just yours to tell. Who the hell is he? Boss, your editor? You pitched my life before I even knew it. Brandon's face drained of color, hazel eyes wide with guilt. Eli, wait, it's not like that. I started it months ago, fictionalized, before us. Then, it changed. Became about you. I was gonna tell you, show you the final draft, but the betrayal stung, sharp as the cold biting through Elijah's jacket, a violation wrapped in art, his pain commodified for some literary breakthrough. You saw me breaking and thought, plot twist? Elijah shouted, voice echoing off the water. Get out. Brandon left at dusk, tail lights fading into the tree line, the cabin suddenly vast and echoing. Elijah burned the sketchpad in the stove that night, flames devouring the lines that had once promised connection, tears hissing on the embers. Alone again, he pored over Tommy's journal, the words a lifeline. Betrayal cuts deepest from those we hand our hearts to. But it's in the mending we find our truest shape. Dawn found him packing, the key to the cabin left on the mantel, a return to sender, or perhaps a pause. New York waited, with its grind and ghosts, but Elijah drove south with a new inheritance. Not just secrets, but the courage to guard his own. Back in the city, the diner welcomed him with open arms and closed questions. Mia hugging him fierce at shift's end. Jack's text sparse but steady. Cabin's yours anytime. Brandon's silence was a void, radioed across deleted contacts and avoided neighborhoods. Weeks blurred into a numb routine. Sketches of fractured figures. Nights scrolling queer memoirs for solace. The ache a constant companion. Then, one rainy Tuesday, a package arrived, no return address, wrapped in brown paper smelling faintly of graphite and regret. Inside, a bound manuscript, unfathered, with a note, "This is the truth version." No editors, no sales. Just us. "Forgive me, B." Elijah's hands trembled as he read. The pages alive with their story, not exploited, but honored. The DNA shock in stark black and white panels. The cabin's warmth in watercolor washes. Their love rendered tender and flawed. The climax hit like a gut punch. Brandon's own revelation. Inked confession. He'd known about the cabin because his mother, a nurse in the 80s, had cared for Tommy in his final days, passing stories to a son who'd hidden his queerness until New York set him free. The unexpected inheritance? Not just land, but a tangled family tree where their roots intertwined, cousins by blood, lovers by choice. Tears blurred the final page. Elijah, standing whole on the rooftop, rain cleansing old wounds, Brandon's hand in his. It wasn't a hook, it was hope. Elijah texted the number he hadn't deleted. Rooftop. Now. The storm broke as Brandon arrived, soaked and searching, words tumbling. "I fucked up. But this us, it's real. No more hiding." Elijah pulled him close, lips meeting in the downpour, the city a symphony below. "Prove it," he whispered, and in that kiss, forgiveness bloomed, messy, human, unbreakable. Months later, spring unfurled over Brooklyn like a hesitant apology. Cherry blossoms dusting the sidewalks in pink confetti as Elijah and Brandon navigated the tender rebuild of trust. The manuscript sat on Elijah's drafting table. No longer a betrayal but a bridge. Unfathered self-published in a quiet run. Copies gifted to Jack and Mia. This page is a testament to shared scars. "It's not just my story anymore," Brandon had said during their rooftop reconciliation. Rain sluicing down their faces as they clung like survivors. "It's ours. And Tommy's. Jack's. Let it heal what it can." Jack had read it in one sitting. The cabin's key returned to Elijah with a gruff. "Burn it or build on it, your call, kid." But the old man softened after that, showing up to their first joint exhibit in Chelsea with a bouquet of bodega daisies and a rare smile. The show was Elijah's breakthrough. Digital prints of family ghosts reimagined. Tommy's poems visualized in swirling inks. Jack's hands rendered heroic against diner fluorescence. Brandon's compass tattoo evolving into maps of emotional terrain. Critics called it a queer odyssey of inheritance. But for Elijah, it was catharsis. Each sale a step toward owning the unexpected legacy. Their life wove tighter in the interim. Brandon's loft became their loft. Walls papered with collaborative panels. Elijah's clean lines meeting Brandon's brooding shadows in tales of modern outlaws. Mornings started with coffee brewed strong. Elijah sketching at the kitchen island while Brandon plotted arcs aloud. Their laughter a counterpoint to the city's ceaseless hum. Intimacy deepened. No longer frantic but rooted. Lazy Sundays lost in each other's bodies. Explorations that whispered "I see you" in every curve and sigh. "You're my plot twist," Brandon teased one afternoon, pinning Elijah to the rumpled sheets. hazel eyes alight with that Midwestern mischief. Elijah arched into him, gasping, "Make it count." Their union a symphony of trust rebuilt stroke by stroke. Yet conflict simmered beneath the idol, a low boil fed by old fears. Elijah's sessions with a therapist, recommended by Mia, who moonlighted as a social worker, unearthed layers of abandonment anxiety. The DNA reveal a catalyst for questioning every bond. What if it's all borrowed? He'd confess in the dim office overlooking Prospect Park. The counselor's nods a gentle prod toward self-compassion. Brandon attended a few, his own divorce scars flaring in the mirror of Elijah's doubts, their hands clasped under the tissue box like lifelines. The real fracture came in June, heat wave sticky and unrelenting, when Jack called from the hospital, pneumonia, the kind that hit old vets hard. Elijah raced to Mount Sinai, Brandon trailing with overnight bags, the sterile halls echoing his father's labored breaths. Jack looked small in the bed, for lines snaking like accusations, but his grip on Elijah's hand was iron. "Don't you dare sentimentalize this," he wheezed. "I sharp. Got unfinished business." That night, as monitors beeped a mechanical lullaby, Jack confessed the rest. Tommy hadn't just left the cabin. He'd willed a trust, modest but steady, proceeds from a life insurance payout funneled through a discreet lawyer, earmarked for the boy to fund dreams unhindered by grease and grind. "Used it quiet-like for your art supplies over the years," Jack admitted, voice fading. "Figured you'd hate me for it." Elijah's throat tightened, the unexpected inheritance crystallizing. Not money, but a father's silent sacrifice, queer love's quiet provision. Brandon stood sentinel in the hall, fielding Mia's worried texts, but when Elijah emerged hollow-eyed, he pulled him into an alcove, foreheads touching in shared grief. "He's a fighter," Brandon murmured, but the lie hung heavy. Dawn brought the crash codes called, paddles thumping, Elijah frozen in the doorway as Jack slipped away, the last exhale a ragged "love you, kid." The room emptied to echoes, Elijah collapsing against Brandon, sobs wrenched from a place beyond words. The funeral was a small affair in Astoria's Catholic Church. Ironic, given Jack's lapsed faith and hidden truths, filled with diner regulars, a few nom-buddies, and Tommy's distant kin who'd surfaced after the obituary, awkward handshakes bridging decades. Elijah spoke, voice steady through the haze. "He taught me family isn't blood. It's showing up, even when it hurts." Brandon's arm around his waist was the only anchor, their grief a private current amid the condolences. In the aftermath, the cabin called like a siren song. They drove up in July, heat yielding to cooler altitudes, the A-frame a sanctuary dusted with summer's green. Elijah scattered Jack's ashes by the lake at sunset, words from Tommy's journal carried on the wind, to the water that holds all our secrets. Brandon sketched the moment, not for pages but for them, a private archive. Nights there were healing rituals, bonfires crackling with old photos, bodies entwined under star-pricked skies, Elijah riding the waves of sorrow and solace in Brandon's arms. But betrayal's echo lingered, manifesting in a letter from the trust's lawyer. Among the funds, a codicil from Tommy naming Jack as beneficiary, yet Jack had redirected it all to Elijah, and signed. He gave up his share, the lawyer explained over crackly phone. Said you deserved a clean start. The revelation hit during a hike. Elijah sinking to the trail, the weight of dual paternities crushing. "They both chose me over themselves," he choked, Brandon kneeling to hold him. "What if I can't measure up?" You already do, Brandon insisted, voice fierce. This isn't debt, it's gift. Their kiss there, amid wildflowers and whispers, sealed a pact. No more hiding inheritances, blood or otherwise. Fall brought equilibrium, the city golden and forgiving. Elijah landed a gig illustrating for a queer lit mag, panels that breathed life into stories of chosen families. Brandon's next book, Bridges Unburned, wove their tale without exploitation, abstract arcs of revelation and repair, dedicated to Eli, who mapped the way home. Jack's diner stool became Elijah's occasional haunt, a stool preserved like a throne, toasts raised to absent toasts. Yet the humanistic core tested them anew in November, anniversary of the test. Package arrived, Tommy's kin, a cousin named Lena, enclosing a videocassette, grainy footage of a 70s Pride rally. Tommy and Jack arm in arm amid chanting crowds, young and unbowed. Watching it on the loft's ancient VCR, Elijah wept for roads not taken, Brandon's tears mingling as they held each other. We get to live it louder, Brandon vowed, and in the quiet that followed, they did love a defiant flame against the chill. Winter clamped down on New York like a judgmental X, snow piling high against the loft windows as Elijah and Brandon hunkered into a cocoon of deadlines and domesticity. The video from Lena became their talisman, replayed on snowy evenings with mulled wine, Tommy's laugh a bridge across time. Look at him, your dad, our ghost, Elijah would say, tracing the screen where Jack dodged a confetti bomb, eyes alight with a joy Elijah had glimpsed only in faded photos. Brandon, ever the storyteller, spun hypotheticals. What if they'd run, built a life in the hills? But Elijah knew better. Their era's chains were iron. Love forged in secrecy a different kind of brave. Creative sparks flew in the cold. Elijah's illustrations evolved, incorporating archival scans. Tommy's sketches layered into digital dreamscapes, exhibited in a Soho pop-up that drew queer elders sharing their own hidden histories. You're giving us voices, one silver-haired man told him, grip trembling on Elijah's hand, and the validation settled deep, the inheritance transforming from burden to beacon. Brandon's writing deepened too, his panels less jagged, more luminous, their collaborations bleeding into joint projects, a webcomic series, Echoes Unsilenced, chronicling intergenerational queer resilience. Intimacy thrived in the hush, bodies seeking warmth in deliberate ways. Slow mornings where Elijah woke to Brandon's mouth charting lazy paths down his chest, gasps echoing off iced glass. Evenings lost in the clawfoot tub, steam veiling their reflections as hands explored with reverent curiosity. You're my constant, Elijah murmured once, straddling Brandon in the suds, water sloshing as they moved in unhurried harmony. Climax a shared shudder that left them boneless and bound. Love, once tentative, now rooted firm, declarations slipped casual into pillow talk. Rings discussed in hypotheticals that felt like vows. But conflict brewed in the margins, subtle as a plot leak. Brandon's agent, a sharp-suited shark named Carla, pushed for a memoir tie-in, capitalize on the family drama. Readers eat that shit up. Late calls from her office left Brandon pacing, voice low on the phone. Elijah pretending not to overhear the temptations of advances and tours. It's business, Brandon dismissed one night, collapsing beside Elijah on the couch. But the seed of doubt sprouted. Had the first betrayal been aberration or archetype? The storm broke in February. Valentine's a farce of wilted roses when Carla arrived unannounced. Bottle of Uve and contract in tow. Think of the impact, she cooed over takeout Thai, eyes gleaming at Elijah like he was Exhibit A. Your story could change lives. Fund that cabin into a retreat for queer youth. The words twisted benevolent. But Elijah saw the commodification, the reduction of his pain to pitch deck. It's not a brand, he snapped, shoving back from the table, the room spinning with old angers. Brandon's silence was damning, his half-hearted Eli's right a feeble shield. The fight erupted post-Carla, words flying like snow flurries. You're selling us out again, Elijah accused, voice raw in the loft's echo. Brandon fired back, hurt lacing his defense. I'm trying to build something. For us, you think art pays without compromise. The chasm yawned, accusations of exploitation clashing with cries of ingratitude, until Elijah stormed out into the blizzard, boots crunching toward the subway, tears freezing on his lashes. He crashed at Mia's in Bed-Stuy, her pull-out couch a war zone of rumpled quilts and tough love talks. Babe. He's scared too. Success means losing the underdog shield. She reasoned over dawn pancakes, but Elijah's heart ached with the echo of Tommy's warning. Love demands vigilance, lest it curdle to possession. Days blurred into radio silence. Brandon's texts unread, the loft a ghost town in his mind. Reentry came circuitous, via the cabin Lena, Tommy's cousin, emailing about a spring cleanup, inviting Elijah to claim more relics. He drove solo, the Ford's heater sputtering like Jack's old cough, arriving to find the A-frame thawed but tentative, birdsong a balm to his frayed edges. Boxes waited in the attic, letters from Tommy to Rosa, blueprints for expansions Jack had sketched but never built, a half-finished quilt pieced from pride flags. Amid the dust, Elijah found clarity. The inheritance wasn't flawless men, but flawed loves persisting despite. On impulse, he texted Brandon, cabin. No agendas. Just talk. The reply pinged immediate, 2 hours. Tension hummed as Brandon pulled up, snowmelt dripping from his Subaru, his approach hesitant on the porch. I told Carla no, he said without preamble, handing over a crumpled rejection email. You're not a plot point. We're the story, private, messy, ours. Elijah searched his face, seeing the fear mirrored, and pulled him inside, the door clicking shut like a decision. Forgiveness unfolded slow, words first, over stew simmered from pantry staples, confessions of insecurities aired like laundry. I thought if I controlled the narrative. Brandon trailed, voice cracking. Elijah cupped his jaw, thumb tracing the familiar line. We write it together or not at all. The loft of the cabin witnessed their mending, bodies reconnecting with urgent tenderness. Brandon's hands reverent on Elijah's hips, Elijah's nails raking paths of possession and release, their cries a duet against the rafters. Dawn found them entwined, the quilt pulled high, whispers weaving plans. No memoirs, but perhaps a foundation, the trust seeded into scholarships for young artists like them. Back in the city, spring's thaw mirrored their own, collabs renewed, with boundaries etched firm. Carla was cut loose, her dramatics a cautionary arc. And in her wake, quiet victories. Elijah's first solo show at a Bushwick gallery, Brandon's comic optioned for a sensitive indie adaptation. Jack's birthday posthumous, marked by diner toasts, became tradition, stories swapped with growing circle of kin. Lena a regular now, her tales of Tommy's activism filling gaps. Yet the humanistic pulse quickened in May, when Elijah's blood work came back irregular, echoes of Tommy's era, A shadow of HIV flagged early, treatable but terrifying. The doctor's office, sterile and stark, blurred as he called Brandon from the parking garage. Voice a whisper, "It's positive, but manageable." Brandon's arrival was a blur of tires screeching, arms enveloping in the front seat, sobs shared in the Honda's confines. "We'll fight it, like they did," Brandon vowed. And in the weeks of consults and pills, their love proved alloy. Doctors' visits hand in hand, support groups where Elijah shared his lineage, turning personal dread to communal strength. By summer, stability reigned, the virus a managed footnote, Elijah channeling it into art. Installations of red ribbons woven with family threads, exhibited at Pride with Brandon's narrative overlays. The crowd's response, embraces from strangers, elders nodding recognition, affirmed the inheritance's reach. Not curse, but call to resilience. Autumn's palette returned, leaves carpeting Central Park in fire as Elijah and Brandon crested the hill toward Bethesda Fountain, hand in hand amid the Pride afterglow. The march had been electric, rainbow flags snapping like heartbeats, chants echoing Tommy and Jack's silent marches. Elijah's installation, a centerpiece float trailed by queer youth clutching pamphlets on the Trust's new grants. "You did this?" Brandon murmured, squeezing Elijah's fingers. His own comic booth a smash at the expo, signed copies clutched by fans who saw themselves in the pages. Elijah leaned into him, the arches spray misting their faces like benediction. "We did. All of us." The year had forged them in unexpected fires. The HIV diagnosis a pivot that stripped illusions, bearing love's raw utility. Meds stabilized quick. Side effects a hurdle leaped with Brandon's midnight pep talks and Mia's care packages of ginger tea. But the deeper work was communal, joining a peer group at GMHC, where elders swapped prep stories with wide-eyed newbies. Elijah facilitating sessions on legacy, his voice steady. "My dad's taught me survival's collective." Jack's Diner funded the first scholarship. A kid from Queens with sketches that sang of hidden hurts. Tommy's Cabin hosted retreats, a frame echoing with laughter where silence once reigned. Their partnership deepened in the dailies. Collaborative zines mailed to prisons, queer-lit readings in backyards turned salons. Intimacy evolved to nights where vulnerability led. Elijah guiding Brandon's hands to scars unseen, their lovemaking a ritual of affirmation. Slow builds to shattering peaks that left them whispering gratitudes into sweat-damp skin. "Marry me?" Brandon asked one October eve, on the cabin porch under harvest moon. Ring simple, compass-etched silver, engraved without chains. Elijah's yes was a breath, sealed with a kiss that tasted of forever. Winter whispered warnings, though Lena's health faltered, a stroke felling the last direct link to Tommy. Her bedside vigil in a Poughkeepsie hospital was a family affair. Elijah and Brandon flying up with Jack's old Ford loaned from storage. Stories shared in beeps and blooms. "Tell the boy about the rally," Lena rasped. And they did. Tales of Stonewall's fire reaching rural queers. Tommy's organizing bridging coasts. She passed peaceful, leaving the cabin's deed clear to Elijah, a final thread in the tapestry. Spring's renewal brought ceremony. A small wedding in the Shangumps, wildflowers and witnesses. Mia officiating with tearful flair. Queer kin from city and country toasting under the eaves. Vows echoed journals and panels. "I inherit your courage," Elijah pledged. "Brandon's and I your heart." The reception dissolved into dance. Bodies swaying to Joan Baez's covers. Love a defiant waltz against time's tide. Years folded forward. the unexpected inheritance rippling outward. Elijah's studio thrived. Murals commissioned for community centers depicting braided lineages. Brandon's novels garnered awards, proceeds seeding the foundation into a network of artist residencies. They adopted a rescue pup, a scruffy mutt named Jax, homage hybrid, whose romps in the park mirrored their own joyful chaos. Fatherhood came later, via surrogacy with a chosen donor from their circle, a son named Theo, dark-eyed and determined, raised on bedtime tales of Granddad's grit. Tragedy tempered the joy, an EF4 tornado ripping through Brandon's Iowa hometown in '32, scattering family photos and forcing a pilgrimage to rebuild. Amid the rubble, they unearthed Brandon's mother's letters, revelations of her quiet allyship to Tommy's care, closing the circle, inheritances unexpected, but entwined. "We're the proof," Brandon said, sifting debris, Elijah's arm around him as Theo toddled nearby. By mid-century mark, gray threaded their temples. The loft traded for a brownstone with garden plots yielding tomatoes like small triumphs. Theo, out at 15 with a boyfriend named Kai, rolled eyes at their ancient queer lore, but absorbed it deep, volunteering at the retreats, sketching his own arcs. Pride marches became annual pilgrimages. Elijah and Brandon arm in arm like ghosts made flesh, banners reading love without chains. The end came gentle for Elijah at 78. Pneumonia a poetic echo. The cabin his hospice where family gathered, Theo reading Tommy's poems, Brandon's hand in his, unwavering. "You gave me everything unexpected," Elijah whispered, breath feathering. Brandon leaned close, tears salting the words. "And you, me," as the lake lapped lullabies. Elijah slipped free, legacy a living flame. Brandon lingered a decade more, pages turning slower, the brownstone a museum of their making. He passed in Theo's arms, sketchpad clutched. Final panel, 2 figures on a rooftop, rain cleansed, hands linked eternal. The service spilled to the cabin, ashes to water, circle complete. In the years after, Theo stewarded the inheritance. Grants expanded, stories amplified, love's chain unbroken. For in the end, it wasn't blood or betrayal that defined them, but the humanistic heart, choosing each other, daily, defiantly, a gay son's unexpected gift to the world, roots that reached wide, blooming unapologetic.